welcome to our elections Q&A with Daily Kos Elections. I'll be your moderator, Jeff Singer. This panel will be a Q&A. We do not have any presentations. We do not have any PowerPoints. It will just be your questions, our answers. I will quickly explain how this will work and introduce each of our panelists, and then we can get started. So you'll notice there's a Q&A function right at the bottom of the screen. It is second from the right. Right there, you can type in your questions and we will get to as many as possible. And this event will be closed captioned in real time. And to help that along, we'll be saying our name before we give each of our answers. So I am Jeff Singer. I am your moderator. I am the elections editor at Daily Kos, and I'm the lead writer on the Morning Digest, which is our roundup of key campaign news that gets published every weekday. If you can subscribe to that at Daily Kos Elections, and it will be sent into your inbox each weekday morning. You can also find it at Daily Kos Elections each day. Next, we have Lala Wu. Lala is the co-founder and director of engagement and partnerships at the Sister District Project, a national grassroots organization founded in the wake of the 2016 elections with the goal of strengthening Democratic majorities in the states to build progressive power nationwide. It's grown continuously since its founding to around 45,000 members and over 100 active teams and affiliates, each of which are sistered in 2 to 4 state legislative candidates for support each year. And it has raised over $1.8 million, endorsed in over 57 races, and it's playing a pivotal role this year in the legislative battles to make sure we have a good seat at the table before the census comes in. Next is Stephen Wolf. Stephen is our elections staff writer at Daily Kos who focuses on redistricting, analysis, and voting rights. He's the author of the weekly Voting Rights Roundup newsletter, in addition to contributing to the Morning Digest. You can also subscribe to the Voting Rights Roundup. It comes in at the end of each week. It is vital to find out about what's going on with gerrymandering, with access to voting, just such pivotal topics, especially this year, perhaps more than ever. Next, we have Carolyn Fiddler. Carolyn is our communications director at Daily Kos. She's worked in communications and state politics for the better part of the decade, most recently as the National Communications Director for the Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee. And she is vital for anything going on with state legislative races or what's just going on in the state legislatures. She also has a newsletter that goes out every Thursday evening, This Week in State House Action, which I think it's fair to say it is the funniest newsletter you will find out about Republican power grabs and also what the good things that are happening in the legislatures. And last but not least, we have Matt Booker. He is our elections researcher. Matt is in charge of keeping all our many Daily Kos Elections databases up to date and in doing the research for so many vital topics. If we're debunking a Republican attack ad, it's because Matt found the information to debunk it. Matt also writes about special elections. We've had quite a few over the last few years. Just on Tuesday, Democrats flipped a historically Republican state house seat in South Carolina. So as we're pretty much at the end of the special election season, I'd say, but we're going to have a lot more action the next year or so, and Matt will be contributing to that. So without further ado, we will get to your questions. First up, which state could/should be considered the tipping point state to the Electoral College? I think that every Democrat will say Wisconsin because we all have very bad memories, and of the states that had voted Democratic and then went for Trump, Wisconsin was probably the closest. A lot of people say Wisconsin is going to decide the election. I don't think any single state really ever becomes the deciding one before, or we don't think it's going to be the deciding one beforehand. After the fact, we can always say, well, if we'd gotten X number of votes before in Florida or Ohio, we would have won, but there's always multiple paths to victory. But I think it's hard to see us losing the 2020 election if we win Wisconsin this time. And if we lose it, we could make up the ground in, say, Arizona. But yeah, I would say Wisconsin. So next up, we have the Kansas Senate seat. What are the best strategies for the Democratic candidate, Barbara Bollier, to win? I'll turn that over to the panel if anyone wants to jump in. All right, well, it just so happens I've written about this a lot. So Jeff Singer for the closed captioning, I'll answer it. This is Barbara Bollier. She's a former moderate Republican state senator. She switched parties at the end of 2018, and she's the Democratic nominee for the Kansas U.S. Senate seat. This is sort of infamously a seat that Republicans held for a very, very long time. The last time a Democrat won a U.S. Senate race in Kansas was 1932. And Kansas itself, it's been a very red state. The last Democrat to win it was Lyndon Johnson in 1964. It's a tough one, but Roger Marshall, the congressman who just won the Republican primary, he won after a very bruising contest. So if Bollier's going to win, first, there's a bit out of her control. Donald Trump won the state by about 20 points in 2016. If something like that happens again in 2020, probably there isn't enough crossover support to win. I'm also told their name is pronounced Bollier, so thank you. So for Bollier to win, first of all, she doesn't necessarily need Trump to lose the state, but she needs it to be a lot closer. We don't know how close, but maybe 5 points. She's also going to need some crossover voters who are planning to vote for Trump. Probably she wants to do that in the Kansas City suburbs, a pretty historically Republican region that's been going against Trump lately. So she's going to need to find crossover voters who maybe are planning to vote for Trump reluctantly, but aren't necessarily on board with the Republican Congressman Roger Marshall. She has a lot of money. She probably wants to emphasize moderation in that one because the Democratic base, it's already with us. So she really does need a lot to go right, but it's doable. She's the underdog, but it's doable. Our next question is the Georgia U.S. Senate special election. It's an all-party primary in November where all the candidates run on one ballot, and in the very, very likely event that no one wins majority, the two candidates with the most votes, regardless of party, they'll advance to a January runoff. The question is, what is being done to prevent an all-Republican runoff? So I will turn that over to the panel.
Matt Booker. So that's a really good question because that's definitely something that's in the cards. Because there are two very well-known Republican candidates. You have Doug Collins, who is currently a member of Congress, and Kelly Loeffler, who is currently the senator for the seat. She was appointed to the seat by Brian Kemp earlier this year. She's been embroiled in some scandals this year. So she's not exactly the strongest candidate, and Collins is looking like a very formidable opponent for her. But in the polling that we've seen, a lot of times it's been Loeffler and Collins in the top two slots, and the three Democratic candidates, you have Ed Tarver, who is a former U.S. attorney, Matt Lieberman, who is the son of Joe Lieberman, former senator and vice presidential candidate. And the biggest name candidate probably is Raphael Warnock, who is the pastor at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. He's the best shot. Warnock is the one who the National Democrats have coalesced around. DSCC has endorsed him. Stacey Abrams has endorsed him. John Ossoff, who's running in the other Senate race, has endorsed him. He's the one that Democrats are really lining up behind. The polling hasn't been amazing for him yet. When there are polls that have a Democrat in the second slot, generally speaking, it's been Lieberman. He has been benefiting from name rec and things like that. But the idea would be for Warnock to be the second candidate. He's the one that the National Democrats like. He's the one with the money behind him. So what's being done to prevent that is for them to being locked out. Well, recently, sorry. So Lieberman recently had unearthed some novel that he wrote a few years ago with racist language in it, and the head of the NAACP asked for him to drop out of the race. So maybe not the best of circumstances, but that could be a way for Warnock to ascend to that kind of top tier spot for the Democrats. But that's the goal, is for Warnock to be the guy. He's the one that's going to have the national support behind him. He's going to be the one that has the money behind him. So he's the best shot Dems have to not get locked out of this seat.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah, so please keep the questions coming using our Q&A function. Our next question will be from me to Lala. As someone who can only afford to donate small amounts to candidates, do you have any suggestions on how to determine who needs our money the most? Or what is the biggest bang for the buck? Or what's the biggest difference you can make with a small donation?
Thanks for that question. So I'll start out by saying, I think one thing that has been interesting for me to observe in this work is that people really make their donation decisions very emotionally. And I would suggest the people who kind of feel the most at peace and satisfied with the way they spend their political money is to make a budget. You know, think about how much money you want to spend on politics. Be open to expanding it, of course, but make a budget and then think about what your values are and think about how you can line up what your priorities and what you care about with that kind of spending. So for me, I'm a little biased because our organization supports state legislative races exclusively. And that is because we do believe they are the biggest bang for your buck, especially when you look for the states that are highly strategic and have a bunch of nested opportunities. So what we are looking for this year in 2020 in particular is states where the state legislature controls redistricting. Of course, that's critical because we have a once in a decade opportunity to redraw district lines next year, and it's our last chance this year to elect good leaders who are going to fight gerrymandering and draw these fair maps. So state legislatures are really critical. Obviously, I think everybody on this panel agrees with me. And then if you're here listening in this audience, I think you're probably part of the converted as well. But then keeping, of course, focusing in on those legislatures where the state legislature controls redistricting, and then looking for those races where, I think that top tier is, of course, really, really important. We're in a lot of those races, a sister district. That tier 2, that tier 3 is really important as well. And I think it's really good to build a diverse portfolio so that we can make sure that we're spreading the love and winning, maximizing our resources as we head into November. And I'll also say, if you have some trouble, it's very overwhelming. There are, of course, thousands and thousands of state legislative seats out there. There are really great organizations and really great resources that can help you kind of narrow it down. I will make a plug for Sister District. We help you do that. We actually just endorsed, because of our strong fundraising this year, we're able to endorse another 4 races just yesterday. We'll be announcing 3 more in September, which will make for a total of 36. And out of 6,000 or so races, that's a manageable number. There are other organizations as well that can help you kind of narrow it down. And of course, Daily Kos is a wonderful resource for getting your hands on that information.
Yeah. Thank you, Lala. Our next question There is a lot of pushes out there to vote by mail and vote early. Is there any organizing around early voting, specifically at drop boxes and other locations that are immune to Trump's post office manipulation?
Hi, everyone. This is Stephen Wolf. So if you haven't been following the news, what we just saw today is that Trump essentially said that he is trying to shut down the post office by denying funding. And he's doing that specifically because he doesn't want people voting by mail. And so over the last several weeks, his postmaster general has been implementing changes that have led to widespread delays in mail delivery. And so this is causing a lot of concern among the voting community. And so there are alternatives to Trump's sabotage of the post office, the most important of which is if you do intend to get your ballot by mail, you can return it at your local elections office in many states. And some states, particularly my own in Oregon, we have what are called drop boxes, which are secure locations where instead of a regular polling place, you just take your completed ballot and drop it in a box, maybe even through a drive-through window or something like that. And there are efforts to set these up. Unfortunately, Trump is trying to stop those too. He is currently waging a lawsuit in Pennsylvania trying to prevent drop boxes. And that lawsuit is still in question. So it's very much an open question what will happen. But if Trump continues to dismantle the post office really and prevent people from voting by mail due to delays, there is the option to vote in person. And if you feel that it's safe enough to do that, we would recommend that you strongly consider it. Just if you do, make sure you wear a mask, bring some hand sanitizer, and bring your own pen.
This is Lala. I'll just jump in to say that I'm involved in a number of different coalitions around different states, and there's a lot of variation by state of what's going on, and it's challenging. It makes it really confusing for people. So it's important that voters get out there and make sure they go to the Secretary of State website, understand what's going on, talk to their friends, get out there and spread the word about how to vote safely. I think drop boxes are going to be incredibly important, and there are a lot of groups who are trying very, very hard to push for drop boxes because of all the reasons that Stephen was just talking about. And I think that one really creative tactic I learned of recently was that in Michigan, a grassroots coalition there has been pushing to make October 10th, so that's 10/10/2020, the drop your ballot off day. And so everybody just bring a friend, go drop your ballot off, get it in early, and then you don't have to worry about it anymore. Don't have to worry about the concerns about the postal office, which is a crazy thing we have to worry about these days. But
Great, thank you. Our next question is, what are the top state legislative chambers held by Republicans that Democrats are targeting to flip this year?
This is Carolyn. I'll answer that one. Democrats are pretty much exclusively playing offense this year, which is great news. So in terms of the top targeted chambers, there are sort of two categories that these fall into. One is, I think, the top tier, which is flippable and has a role to play in that state's redistricting process. And then slightly below that are flippable, but aren't involved in redistricting in any meaningful way. So the top chambers currently held by Republicans that Democrats should be targeting for both of those purposes this year, redistricting and flippability, are the Arizona House and Senate. Arizona House, Dems need to flip 2. Senate, 3. The Michigan House, Democrats need to flip 4. The Minnesota Senate, try not to think of this one as a gimme, but Democrats only have to flip 2, fingers crossed. North Carolina House, Democrats have to flip 6. North Carolina Senate, Democrats have to flip 5, and flipping at least one of these chambers is absolutely critical because that governor has nothing to do with redistricting in that state whatsoever. The Pennsylvania House, Democrats have to flip 9, and the Texas House, where Democrats also have to flip 9. So those are top of the list. I would add sort of in terms of flippability, but not a huge role in redistricting. I would kind of slide Iowa House onto that list at this point in the cycle. couple months ago, I wouldn't have said that. But things are looking really strong for them there. And some of you might have questions about Arizona House and Senate. They have an independent redistricting commission. This is true, but for the entire last decade, the Republicans in the legislature have been working day and night to try and dismantle it. They've, sued against it. They've sued against how it's formed. They've been very legally creative and so far unsuccessful. But at some point, some Supreme Court, especially under its current composition, may well decide that the IRC in Arizona is a bad idea. So it is crucial to get one of those chambers to help protect that institution.
Thank you, Carolyn.
This is Stephen. Just adding one small thing to what Carolyn said. I would actually say that the Iowa House does kind of matter for redistricting. Iowa has a nonpartisan commission that they've had for decades, but they've never had single party control in the last several decades. And it's possible Republicans could just vote to ignore what the commission does. That would be very unprecedented, but there's nothing really stopping them unless we flip the House.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. Please keep the questions coming through our Q&A function. Our next question, thoughts on the Massachusetts Senate primary between Senator Ed Markey and Congressman Joe Kennedy? Jeff Singer, that happens to be my home state. And so this is an interesting one. This is a seat Democrats are guaranteed to hold. No one's questioning that. The question is who will be our nominee, whether it's going to be Markey or Kennedy. A few months ago, Kennedy very much looked like the front runner. Markey, no one really seems to dislike him, but he's not, didn't really have a lot of statewide name recognition, even though he's been there a while. Kennedy, the congressman himself isn't that well known, but well, he's a Kennedy. It's the most famous political family in Massachusetts, if not the whole country. Two of his great uncles are John F. Kennedy and Senator Ted Kennedy, and his grandfather is RFK. So Joe Kennedy, he really looked like the favorite for a while. It's getting closer. Everyone seems to agree on that. Part of it is there's a perception Kennedy really hasn't given a good reason for why he's challenging Markey. Kennedy does talk a lot about how, well, Kennedy is much younger than Markey. He talks a lot about having new ideas, but Markey, he has some very prominent endorsements. He has AOC behind him. So this isn't really just a lot of these primaries can be framed as the establishment versus the anti-establishment, and that's really not the case here. And Markey's been talking a lot about how he's been a big proponent for the Green New Deal and other legislation. And Kennedy's made some mistakes. My favorite one was a few months ago, Ed Markey put out a map of all the communities in Massachusetts he's been in. And Kennedy's campaign said, well, what about these 3 towns? And well, Markey has not been those 3 towns, it's true, because they were flooded in the 1930s for a reservoir. So probably was a minor thing, but it did not exactly make Kennedy look great. In terms of where the race is going, no one's really sure. There was a poll recently just yesterday, that showed Markey ahead by 14 points, but we'll see. Feels a little bit too optimistic for Markey. But everyone, it's pretty close. It really does seem to come down to whose message is going to win in the end. Is it Kennedy's, that Kennedy will be the candidate of new ideas, or there's also this more subtle message that Kennedy really isn't trumpeting but could benefit him, that Massachusetts really could use a Kennedy again. The Kennedy family is very popular here. And then there's the Markey message that he's done a great job in the Senate and he has new ideas. He's the candidate who's going to advance progressive legislation. I don't have a good prediction. The primary, though, is September 1st. So we're probably going to find out very quickly, or we're going to find out very soon how things are going to go. Our next question, what states should be priority for flipping U.S. House delegations in case the presidential election goes to the House? Before I turn that over to the panel, I'll just explain really quickly how that works. In the event that no candidate has a majority of electoral votes, the House officially decides the president. But it's not just a straight up the House doesn't just outright vote who's going to be president. That's not how it works. Every delegation counts. So if you're the one congressman from Alaska, your vote counts as much as the majority of the 53 members from California. So it's whoever can get those 26 delegations wins. This kind of thing has happened just once in 1824 when the House picked John Quincy Adams over Andrew Jackson. So it's not likely, but this kind of thing comes up every so often. So without further ado, what states should be the priority for targeting US House seats in case this happens for the first time in a very long time?
Hey, this is Steven, and I would say at the top of that list is definitely Pennsylvania. Democrats have two good offensive opportunities there in the 10th district with Republican Rep. Scott Perry, and then in the 1st district in the Philadelphia suburbs with Brian Fitzpatrick, and they only need to flip one seat to take a majority of that delegation. After Pennsylvania, you have Michigan, where Democrats could flip the 3rd district, where Justin Amash is retiring for Republicans, or maybe the 6th district with Fred Upton. After those two states, it gets a little harder. You have maybe Florida. Democrats need to take one more seat, and they have one Republican, Ross Spano, in the 15th district, who's been kind of embroiled in a campaign finance scandal. But he's in a district that Trump won by a considerable margin, and it's still going to be an uphill challenge in that state. After those three, it gets a lot harder. You have other chances like maybe Alaska or Montana, but those are traditionally very Republican states where there are some signs of Trump showing some weakness in those states, but it's still going to be difficult in those two. So I would say that the traditional Rust Belt swing states, Pennsylvania and Michigan, are by far the most important for this.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. Our next question. It is 2 Ohio questions. Do you think it's possible to flip the Ohio Supreme Court? And are there any near-term opportunities from the Ohio utility scandal? All right, so in terms of the utility scandal, that's been a big thing. The short thing is their state house speaker, a Republican, he recently, I believe he's had to step down and he's under federal indictment. In terms of opportunities, I'm always kind of just skeptical that things that local really have that much impact outside the immediate candidates. I mean, if more people are involved, that's one thing, but I just feel like that's going to just get so overshadowed by the presidential race and everything else that's happening that it's not going to hurt Republicans unless we can make it a direct line between them. In terms of the Ohio Supreme Court, that is up. I believe the seats are elected statewide, so we can make gains there. The Republicans, they have a big majority. In terms of flipping it, I think it's doable, but Ohio has become a really conservative state recently. Some polls show it's pretty close in the presidential race, but I feel like if Joe Biden wins it, it's going to be pretty close. So we're going to need to stop the people who might be tired of Trump but usually vote Republican down ballot. We're going to need to win them over. It's going to be difficult, but I think it's possible.
And this is Stephen, just adding a little bit to that. The Ohio Supreme Court, their elections are nonpartisan officially, and that kind of helps Democrats if Republicans are winning at the top of the ballot. In 2018, Republicans won the governor's race, and yet Democrats still flipped both court seats on the ballot that year, and Democrats are fielding candidates in both seats where they're contesting them strongly. And if it's close at the presidential level, I would say that Democrats definitely have a chance, although Republicans are probably still favored.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. Please keep the questions going in our Q&A. If you're using the chat to ask questions, please use Q&A. That's the best way to ask. Our next question. Have you seen any messaging testing on abolishing the filibuster? This is Jeff. I have not seen any messaging on that. In terms of the importance of abolishing the filibuster, that's a very important thing if we have a Democratic Senate, House presidency, because the political winds being what they are, we might really only have 2 years to get all the progressive legislation we wanted. And we found that out the hard way in 2010. Trump has found that out the hard way in 2018. So we might just have a short 2-year window. In terms of message testing, it feels like it's a hard thing to campaign on. It's a very important issue, but it's really kind of down the weeds. My personal feeling is it's not going to be a big campaign issue. Once it's done, it's going to be, if we have the Senate, it's going to be a very, very big progressive issue to convince some of these reluctant Democratic senators to go through with it. But in terms of the campaign itself, probably not. That said, it's probably going to be important to put some pressure on Democratic Senate candidates who haven't said how they feel about abolishing the filibuster now, because we want to get them on the record. And during the campaign it's probably the best time. This is when they need our support the most. And having said what they're going to do, that's going to be important later on for persuading them to do the right thing if we have the chance later. Our next question. What do you think of the wildly fluctuating polls in North Carolina for Biden, and what do you think of his chances here? And does Cal Cunningham seem like a better shape to win the state than maybe Joe Biden does?
So Matt Booker. So Biden, I mean, North Carolina, it's such a close state. I mean, it's in the years since 2008 when Barack Obama won it, it kind of felt like North Carolina might it's a highly educated state. It's a diversifying state. It might kind of go the way of Virginia, but it's kind of felt like it's gone more towards Florida, just being a very evenly divided state. And this year, it's really looking like no exception. It's going to be it's going to come down to the wire. At the presidential level, in the Senate race, you have Cal Cunningham, who is Democratic candidate running against the incumbent Tom Tillis. And Tillis won very narrowly in 2014, great Republican year over the incumbent Kay Hagan. He's not doing extremely well polling wise. He's, his favorable, unfavorables kind of stuck in the 30s. So he's definitely vulnerable. And Cal Cunningham is not really a super known entity. He's a little bit of a blank slate in that way. He was a former state senator in the early 2000s for one term, got redistricted out. So he's got a very good chance to win. It's definitely a race that one's going to come down to the wire. It may kind of just depend on who wins. If Donald Trump wins North Carolina, he could very well save Tom Tillis. That's not a given. But regardless, those two races are going to come down to the wire, definitely. But the governor's race in North Carolina, that one is looking a little bit better for Democrats than a toss-up with Roy Cooper running against current Lieutenant Governor Dan Forest. That one is looking better for Democrats. Cooper is consistently leading in that race. So that one maybe won't come down to the wire in the way that the presidential race and the Senate race will. But, a lot of times in North Carolina, it just comes down to one side will have 51% and the other will have 49%. And it just depends on who's having a good year and who ends up on the 51 side.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Our next question. If you had to pick between trying to flip the Texas House and both chambers of the North Carolina legislature, which is more achievable?
This is Carolyn. I'll take that one. Well, that question gives me some wiggle room because, I can still flip one chamber of the North Carolina legislature and be in good shape and flip the Texas House. In terms of achievability, that is a tough one. I think we're in real unprecedented times in terms of what's happening in Texas. I think that Democrats have been making real strides in North Carolina over the course of at least the back half of the decade. They're both very, very heavy lifts. I would say that flipping the Texas House is more achievable than both chambers of the legislature. But in terms of like one chamber in North Carolina versus the Texas House, that's a tougher call. The numbers look a little better in North Carolina, but it's way more than just math. It's about what else is on the ballot in the state. It's about how the political winds are going that year. So that is a tough call. I would say it would be easier to flip one chamber of the North Carolina legislature than the Texas House. But in terms of priorities, Texas House is going to have a lot more to say about a lot more congressional districts than the North Carolina House or Senate. So hopefully there are enough resources to go around for both of those states this year, because I think a lot of people are thankfully not completely fixated on the presidential contests. They're aware that important things are happening down the ballot, so fingers crossed.
Okay, great. And we had a bit of a related question here. What do you think the chances are to flip the North Carolina House and Senate based on the new maps? Since Carolyn addressed that, I'm just going to say a little quick thing about the new maps. So for the third time in this last decade, North Carolina had to redraw its legislative and congressional maps. And that was because, well, the GOP legislature there is just totally evil, and they've drawn up racial gerrymanders, they've drawn up political gerrymanders. The problem is that the court didn't quite push them enough, so they let the Republican legislatures draw the map again. So Republicans drew basically the best map that they could get away with. And the new map, it's better than the old one, but it's still not great. We took a look at it at the end of last year, and one good way to look at this is just compare how many seats did Donald Trump carry versus how well did he do in the state. And he only narrowly won North Carolina, something like 51-47, but he won, I think, upwards of 60% of the seats in each chamber. So it's still tough. It's doable, but we're going to need a lot to go right. We're going to need to win some districts that Donald Trump carried by, if not double digits, very close to double digits in 2016. So that's either those districts are going to need to go really far to the left after 2016, or we're going to need to get a lot of crossover voters. Either can happen or both, but they're both difficult. So I think we're definitely the underdogs. It's doable, but the new map, it's better, but it's not as good as we'd like it. Okay, and please keep the questions coming in our Q&A function. The next question I want to send to Matt. What is the under the radar election this year that you think deserves our attention? Like what election do you think is out there that maybe people aren't aware of as much as it deserves?
I love this question because I get a chance to talk about my favorite district of this entire cycle, Texas's 3rd district, which is in North Texas. It's in Collin County, Plano area. And it's sort of a classic old school suburban district that was, huge. It supported George W. Bush by huge margins and Mitt Romney in 2012 by huge margin. And Donald Trump only won this by, I think, low double digits. I think he won by 13 points in 2016 compared to a near 30-point win for Mitt Romney. And in 2018, Beto O'Rourke only lost this district by 3 points. So it's a clear trend towards us. And like I said, it's a classic kind of wealthier, highly educated suburban district. Maybe not the most diverse district ever, but it has its share of Black, Hispanic, Asian residents. So it's not this conservative district the way that it maybe used to be. And we have a good chance to do well in there. We had a poll recently come out where Joe Biden was only trailing by 1 point, maybe even tied in the district. And we have a good candidate there, the Democrats do, Lulu Cycli, who is a Lebanese American woman. And she's running against the incumbent Van Taylor, who is just won his first election last time. The former Rep. Sam Johnson retired. He replaced him and won by 11 points, which was a decent win, but compared to the past wins where the incumbent would win by 25, 30, 35, sometimes not even have a Democratic opponent, would just be unopposed. So the winds are definitely changing here. And this is the type of district where Collin County has been, the Plano area has been historically conservative. So if Democrats can win this district, win Collin County area, sky's the limit for them in Texas. So this is a district that I've been really watching closely. And I think that Lulu Cycli has a very good chance to win. I think Joe Biden has a very good chance to do well in this district as well.
Great. Jeff Singer. I'll also work in state Supreme Court elections. Those are vital. They're going to be vital for redistricting. They're going to be vital for voting rights. They're already vital. And not all of them are going to be up this year. Some chambers, just because there aren't enough seats or there aren't elections this year, period, they can't be flipped, but some of them can be. Ohio, which we mentioned earlier, that's a big one of them. Michigan, I believe. So those tend to get overlooked, and I think those are a big thing. Our next question is for Lala. Can you tell us about some of your favorite candidates that Sister District has endorsed?
I would love to. It's really hard to choose. There are so many candidates that we absolutely adore, but I can highlight a few. We were just talking about Texas a little bit ago. Of course, there's 9 House seats currently held by Republican, which Beto won. And, even if we won these seats, then we could flip. So that makes makes Texas really, really exciting, as Matt was just talking about as well. There's just so much potential there. Of course, it is really challenging, but if we could break the Republican trifecta, huge impact on gerrymandering. So very tough, but really excited about the 5 candidates that we have supported there. I'll just highlight one of them that we just endorsed. Her name is Akila Basie in District 138. She's a challenger, and she's just a total badass, excuse my language, a native of Houston, and she was an assistant district attorney. She ended up becoming a community, working in the community, advocating for poor people, helping victims of employment discrimination. And she's just really, really dynamic, an incredible woman, and super excited to see her running. And then I'm also really proud that we've got a lot of women who are come from a STEM background. I think this is something that's really needed in our politics and in our legislators today. So we've got a couple really great candidates in Georgia, which I think is, in general, we can't sleep on Georgia this year. Of course, it's not quite a flip opportunity. We would need 16 to flip the House and 7 to flip the Senate, but there are really good inroads opportunities there. And of course, Georgia is new American majority, people of color, women, young people, the rising South, and really important state to focus on. So a couple of candidates there. Joyce Barlow, who's running for District 151. She's a registered nurse and really involved in her community, has been really involved in all of different nonprofits, and really committed to serving her community, and focused on that. And then Jasmine Clark is another candidate we just endorsed, running in District 108 for the Georgia State House. She's a fragile incumbent, but Republicans are really going to be targeting her. She's got a PhD. She's focused on epidemiology. I think bringing this career in the sciences, especially in the time of COVID, is really going to be very, very important to have this kind of knowledge, this kind of expertise in the legislature. Coronavirus is going to have a really long tail. It's going to take us a long time to dig out of the public health and the economic disaster that we're in. So we'll need these strong leaders in the state legislature to help bring us out of it. Those are just a few, but we have a lot of favorite candidates here at Sister District. You can check them all out on our website.
Great. Thank you, Lala. Our next question. What are the circumstances, if any, where Democrat Jamie Harrison can defeat Lindsey Graham in the South Carolina Senate race?
So this is Steven. I guess I'll take this one. So South Carolina is a very traditionally Republican state over the last several decades, and Jamie Harrison, while he's running a very strong race, is going up against an incumbent, and that's a really hard thing to do in a presidential year. So over the last 7 presidential elections, so since 1992, there have been roughly 230 some Senate elections in that time period, and when a Senate race like that coincides with the presidential election, exactly 3 incumbents have lost re-election to a challenger while their presidential party was carrying their state. And all 3 of those races had very unusual circumstances. So just going up against Lindsey Graham with Trump likely to win South Carolina is a huge barrier. Now, that being said, there are unusual circumstances sometimes, and Lindsey Graham has definitely done his best to kind of anger people across the political spectrum over the last several years. And Harrison is probably the strongest candidate that South Carolina Democrats have had in a really long time. And we saw in 2016, there was kind of a similar race where you had an incumbent who wasn't super popular with voters in Missouri, Roy Blunt, where he was going up against challenger Jason Kander, who only lost by 3 points, even though Trump was carrying Missouri by nearly 20. So if South Carolina is particularly close in this election, and we've seen polls where Trump is leading Biden by just a handful of points, it is possible that there is an upset. And so, I'm cautiously optimistic that this race will be close. But I keep telling myself, if history is any guide, it's going to be very difficult.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. Our next question. Given the pandemic and no canvassing, what do you recommend as the most effective remote volunteering?
This is Lala. I'm happy to take that question. Of course, canvassing is the #1 and the best way to reach voters, to have those in-person, person-to-person, make those connections and turn people out. Of course, with the pandemic, the best ways to reach people, we're seeing campaigns focus on phone banking and on text banking. I think postcarding is something that volunteers really love to do, but is less effective as, let's say, phone banking and texting. Phone calls in particular are challenging, they're hard at first, but I think once you start doing them, you get in the swing of things. They can be really fun. You can get through lists really quickly, talk to a lot of people, have really interesting conversations. So I would, really, really highly recommend it. And I think that, a lot of these conversations, in case anybody's concerned or feels intimidated by it, these conversations are usually with really friendly folks. We're usually calling supporters, giving them information about how to vote, and spreading the word in a place that, in a world where everything is very confusing right now. So you can feel good about helping out there. So there's a bunch of different organizations, lots of grassroots groups, lots of national organizations doing phone banking, Sister District included. If you join Sister District, you can get hooked up with your local team, and then you'll have a couple dedicated Sister District state ledge candidates to work on, and then you can phone bank with us. We work directly with the campaigns to make sure that the phone calls you're making are those that the campaign wants and needs. But there's so many opportunities out there to work on, calling people to help them register to vote, reminding them to turn in their absentee ballot, et cetera, et cetera. So make those phone calls. You might not want to, but it's better than losing our democracy.
Thank you, Lala. We only have a few minutes left, so I believe this will be our last question. This will go to Carolyn. What didn't you know before you started working in politics that you've since learned and wish you knew at the start?
Oh boy, this is Carolyn. That is a fascinating question. Well, I got my start in state politics, and I feel like a lot of people who work in politics, it takes them a while to realize how crucial down ballot elections really are. A lot of people get involved in politics for the big, sexy headliner races. But I got my start way down at the bottom of the ballot. So, but something that I wish I'd known was that politicians are actually real people. I guess I was not raised in a political family. I didn't know anything about politics, and then I started meeting all these state lawmakers, and they weren't slick. They weren't, didn't have their own like personal enrichment agendas. They were just trying to make the Commonwealth of Virginia a better place. And that really resonated with me as a impressionable 20-year-old. And I was like, oh, politics is really a way to make the world a better place. This isn't all just this, the way it's depicted on TV is this gross, kind of vulgar thing. And I think that particular lesson is really, really important right now, because I think if there's one thing that we took away from the Trump election in 2016 that is not terrible, which is there are way more terrible things, I get it, but there's one tiny kernel of not badness. And that is the fact that people understand now that authenticity matters. Voters want someone they trust, and they know if you're not being genuine. They know if you're not, if you're not there to, make your state or your country a better place. They figure that out really quickly. And after Trump got elected, a lot of people who didn't think they were, sophisticated enough or educated enough or even like brave enough to run for office, they were just like, I'm doing this now. And that's how we saw a lot of new members of Congress in 2018, new members of state legislatures in 2017, 18, and 19. A lot of people who were genuinely interested in making their state, their country a better place, got off their butts. So I think that feels like a weird like bookend on that early lesson that I took from getting involved in politics. And I think that our Congress, our government is a better place because of that. It's not a better place because of Trump, but working on it.
Great, thank you, Carolyn. We do actually have time for one last question, and the final question. What are some of the key ballot measures this November, especially regarding voting rights?
So it's Stephen again. I'll take this one. And unfortunately, with the pandemic, there have been several ballot measures that have been effectively killed by courts. These courts have refused to allow electronic signatures or other measures to relax the requirements for getting on the ballot. So we've seen, voting expansions go down in Ohio and Arizona and other states. There are, however, some redistricting reform efforts that are still alive. There's one that's already on the ballot in North Dakota that just qualified recently, and there's another one that could qualify in Arkansas. There are some other electoral reform-oriented measures that are either on the ballot or could qualify. Massachusetts and Alaska are both voting on a variation of instant runoff voting, or also referred to as ranked choice voting. And that would change the way that candidates are elected, so you couldn't get elected with a simple plurality anymore. You'd have to have a majority. And there are a few other states where there are still ongoing efforts, but because of these court decisions, they're kind of in doubt, and we should hopefully find out whether they qualify in the next few weeks.
Great, thank you, Stephen. I'll also just add, California has a multitude of ballot measures this year, some good, some not so good. One I would like to just quickly go over is the one to dramatically change or sort of rechange how the tax system works in California, which sounds like a very dry issue, but it's incredibly important for how schools are funded, how municipalities are funded. Back in the 70s, during the tax revolt, the conservatives, they put in place a measure to basically freeze taxes and property taxes and dramatically keep them low. And that's really devastated the state, especially in recessions. I know I used to go to public school in California, and a large part of our funding problems were from that. This year, there's a ballot measure. It's not going to undo that measure from the 70s, but it's going to change some things. It's going to change how some things are taxed. It's not going to change everything in the state, but if it passes, I think it will make a real difference on how things are funded in the nation's biggest state. That is about all the time we have. I want to thank all our panelists, and I want to thank you all for your great questions and for attending. You can find all of us. You can You can find all of us online. You can subscribe to our newsletters, the Daily Kos Elections Morning Digest, the Voting Rights Roundup, This Week in State House Action. And Lala, is there anything with Sister District that people who want to stay in touch, who want to get involved, they can sign up for?
Yes, absolutely. You can go to sisterdistrict.com and there's a volunteer button. So just sign up with us. You will get connected with your local team if you have one in your area. They will reach out to you personally, and don't be intimidated by that. Everybody just wants to figure out what you're interested in, and we can plug you right into supporting some of the most critical races that are happening this year.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. And Carolyn just shared a link to This Week in State House Action, how to sign up for that. I urge you all to do it. As I said, it will be the funniest thing you ever read about state legislative politics. So thank you all for attending, and let's go out and win some elections.